He bought an abandoned garage for pennies at a bankruptcy auction. Inside, piles of garbage, rusty scrap metal, and a stack of old notebooks. He almost threw them away. But curiosity got the better of him. He opened the first page and froze. Formulas, diagrams, calculations he had never seen before. These were drafts of an unfinished invention. When he assembled the device, it worked. And it began producing strange formulas, equations that didn't exist in any textbook. He didn't understand half of it, but he knew this was worth a fortune. It all started 3 weeks ago. Chapter 1, Purchase and Discovery. A 35-year-old man stood before rusty gates holding keys and property documents in his hands. The bankruptcy auction was his last hope to earn at least some money. After being laid off from the factory, he scraped by with odd jobs, barely making enough for rent on his one-bedroom apartment. He heard about the auction from an acquaintance. The bank was selling off debtors' property, and among the lots was an old garage on the outskirts of town. The starting price was laughable at $3,000. Nobody wanted to deal with a half-ruined structure in an industrial zone. He scraped together his last savings, borrowed from friends, and made a bid. There were no competitors. The garage became his. Now he stood before his acquisition and doubted his sanity. The gates barely opened, hinges screeching with rust. Inside reigned chaos. Garbage lay everywhere. Broken tools, empty canisters, tires, pieces of iron. Dust hung thick in the air, cobwebs draped from the ceiling like thick gray curtains. It smelled of mold and machine oil. He turned on his phone's flashlight and began looking around. In the corner stood an old workbench cluttered with junk. On the shelves, rusted cans of nails and bolts. He was about to turn around and leave when he noticed a metal cabinet in the far corner. The door hung on one hinge. Inside, among old rags and boxes, lay a stack of grid pattern notebooks, ordinary school notebooks worn with yellowed pages. He took one, opened it randomly. The page was covered in small handwriting, formulas, diagrams, calculations. He flipped through several more pages, the same thing. Mathematics, physics, some kind of diagrams. He wasn't a scientist, but he understood, and this was something serious. Not just school notes, too complex formulas, too detailed blueprints. He gathered all the notebooks, there were 12 of them. Brought them to the light. Some pages were damaged by moisture, ink had blurred, but most were well preserved. On the title page of the first notebook, in crude handwriting, was written Project Alpha, Energy Converter, version 4.7, experimental data. Below was a date, 20 years ago. His heart beat faster. Energy converter? He leaped further. The diagrams became increasingly complex, formulas longer. In the last notebooks were blueprints of some device, the parts, dimensions, material specifications. The author was clearly working on something big. But why was all this left here in an abandoned garage? Why wasn't the project completed? He sat on an old crate and thought, perhaps the owner died or went bankrupt and the garage passed to the bank. Perhaps the project failed and everything was abandoned. Or maybe this really was something valuable, something that could change everything. Chapter 2, Decoding and Doubts. The following days he spent studying the notebooks. He laid them out on the table in his tiny apartment in chronological order, trying to understand the author's logic. The first notebooks were full of theoretical calculations, energy flow computations, thermodynamic equations, wave mechanics. The author was clearly a talented physicist or engineer. Then the experiments began. Descriptions of tests, measurement results, graphs. The author was trying to create a device capable of converting one type of energy to another with incredible efficiency. The coefficient of efficiency reached 98%. This was fantasy. Modern technologies barely reached 70. He didn't understand all the formulas, but he grasped the general meaning. This was revolutionary. If the device actually worked, it could solve the energy crisis. He tried to find information about the author. On some pages there were initials. He VS, nothing more, no names, addresses, contacts. He approached an acquaintance who was a physicist, showed him several pages with formulas. The physicist studied them for a long time, frowning and muttering to himself. Listen, this is serious work, the physicist finally said. Doctoral dissertation level, maybe higher. Some approaches I haven't even encountered in literature. Where did you find this? In an old garage. Do you think this could work, theoretically? Possibly. Practically. I don't know. You'd have to try assembling it, but there's a bunch of parts I don't even know where to look for. The physicist helped decipher the most complex parts. It turned out most parts were standard. Capacitors, transformers, copper coils, quartz crystals, nothing impossible. You just had to assemble everything correctly. He began purchasing components, spent all his remaining money, worked nights in that very garage that now belonged to him, cleaned it of garbage, ran electricity, set up a workbench. The blueprints were detailed, but in places illegible. He had to improvise, experiment. Sometimes he doubted, maybe he was wasting time and money. Maybe this was the ravings of a mad inventor, not a brilliant discovery. But something inside told him, continue. The author knew what he was doing. Every formula, every diagram was thought through to the smallest detail. This wasn't fantasy, this was science. After 2 weeks, the main framework of the device was ready. It looked strange. A metal cylinder the size of a small barrel, entwined with wires and tubes with several screens and sensors. He connected power and froze. His fingers trembled on the start button. Chapter 3, Launch and Discovery. He pressed the button. The device hummed, a low, vibrating sound that could be felt in the bones. The sensors came alive, needles jerked, numbers ran across the small screen. Temperature was rising, energy output increasing. He couldn't believe his eyes. The coefficient of efficiency was approaching 90%. The device worked, it really was, converting energy almost without loss. This was a breakthrough. But then something strange happened. One of the screens, which was supposed to show energy parameters, began displaying something else in, formulas, equations that weren't in the notebooks. Symbols he couldn't recognize, line after line, as if the device itself was generating new knowledge. He stopped the recording, photographed the screen with his phone, then restarted the device. Again, the same thing, new formulas, new diagrams, different each time. The device wasn't just working, it was continuing to develop, calculating something the author hadn't anticipated, or had he? He returned to the notebooks, reread the last entries. There was a phrase he hadn't noticed before. If the calculations are correct, the device should independently optimize the process and generate new solutions. Artificial intelligence? No, that was too simple. This was something else, a self-learning system based on physical processes, not programming. He called the physicist, asked him to come. He arrived that same evening. They started the device together. The physicist was in shock. "This is impossible," he whispered, looking at the screen. "This shouldn't be. This violates all known principles, but it works." "Yes, it works. What should I do with this?" The physicist was silent, then said slowly, "Do you understand what this is worth? Millions. Tens of millions. Maybe hundreds. If corporations find out you have a working prototype of an energy converter with this efficiency, they'll tear you apart to get the patent. But I don't fully understand how it works. Doesn't matter. What matters is that it works. File for a patent, document everything, and find a buyer. Just be careful. Not everyone can be trusted." He spent a sleepless night transcribing formulas from the screen, photographing every detail of the device, composing a description. In the morning, he contacted a patent attorney, showed him the results. The attorney was skeptical at first, but when he saw video recordings of the device working, his eyes widened. "Is this real?" "Real. If this is true, you're a millionaire. We file the application immediately." Chapter 4. Negotiations and danger. The patent application was filed within a week. The attorney insisted on strictest confidentiality, no publications, no lectures, not a word to anyone, but rumors still leaked. A month later, offers started coming in, first from small startups, then from major energy corporations. The amounts grew: 100,000, 500,000, $1 million, $3 million. He didn't know whom to trust. Every company promised the world but demanded full access to the device and all documentation. The physicist warned, be careful. As soon as you give them everything, you'll become useless. They could cheat, underpay, or even steal the development and sue you. You need a good lawyer. He hired an attorney specializing in intellectual property. Negotiations began with several corporations simultaneously. They sent their experts who examined the device, studied blueprints, checked calculations. Everyone was amazed. One of the experts, an elderly engineer with a world-renowned reputation, told him directly, "I've worked in this field for 40 years. I've never seen anything like this. You're either a genius or you found one." "I found one," he admitted honestly. "In an old garage," the expert smirked. "Sometimes fate smiles on random people. Use this chance wisely." But not everything went smoothly. One night, someone tried to break into the garage. The alarm he'd installed after the first negotiations went off. Police arrived quickly, but the thieves were already gone. They didn't manage to take anything, but he understood this was serious. Someone wanted to get the device at any cost. He moved the prototype to a guarded safe and digitized the blueprints, saving them in the cloud with triple encryption. In parallel, he hired a private detective to find out who the project's author was. The detective found something interesting. 20 years ago, this garage was owned by a certain Viktor Semyonovich Kravtsov, a brilliant physicist who worked at a government enterprise. He died under mysterious circumstances, officially from a heart attack, but there were suspicions. His research disappeared, his family went bankrupt, property was sold off. The garage passed to the bank for debts and sat for 20 years until he bought it at auction. So Kravtsov was a genius who was possibly eliminated to bury his invention. But why? Who would benefit? Large energy monopolies that would lose billions if an efficient converter entered the market. He understood. He was in danger. He accelerated negotiations, demanding a quick decision. Chapter 5, Sale and New Life. The final negotiations took place in the office of an international technology corporation at a black marble table surrounded by lawyers and top managers. He sat opposite the CEO, a gray-haired man with a penetrating gaze. "We offer $8 million for full rights to the patent and all related materials," the director said, "plus 5% of sales from any devices created based on your technology. This is a generous offer." He looked at his lawyer. The lawyer nodded. "This is a fair deal. You won't squeeze out more." He paused, remembering the abandoned garage, notebooks in dust, months of sleepless nights, the attempted theft, Kravtsov's story. $10 million fixed, he said firmly. "No percentages. I want to exit clean." The director squinted, then smiled. "You negotiate well?" Agreed, $10 million. The contract was signed 2 days later. The money arrived in the account the same day. $10 million, an amount he couldn't even dream of 6 months ago. He transferred to the corporation the entire prototype, all blueprints, all notebooks, kept only copies for himself as a memento, and one notebook, the very first one with the initials VS on the cover. He went to the cemetery, found Viktor Semyonovich Kravtsov's grave, a simple gray monument overgrown with grass. He laid flowers and said quietly, "Your invention didn't disappear. It will work. Thank you." The following months passed in pleasant bustle. He bought a house outside the city, a new car, invested money in reliable investments, secured a comfortable future, helped friends who had lent him money to buy the garage, opened a small business, not for money but for the soul, a workshop for repairing vintage cars. He often thought about Kravtsov, about how a brilliant scientist died in poverty and his invention gathered dust for 20 years in a forgotten garage. Life is unfair, but sometimes it gives a second chance, if not to the author, then to whoever finds his legacy. A year later, the corporation announced a new product, a compact energy converter for home use. He watched the presentation on TV and recognized familiar lines, familiar principles. Kravtsov's invention was entering the world. He smiled. Everything worked out. Epilogue. 3 years passed. Kravtsov's converters became the standard in the energy industry, reduced electricity bills for millions of people, decreased carbon emissions, changed the world for the better, and he lived a quiet, peaceful life. House, family, hobbies, comfort without luxury, peace without boredom. Sometimes he went to his workshop, opened the safe, and took out Kravtsov's first notebook, leafed through yellowed pages, remembered that day in the abandoned garage. One random choice at an auction changed everything. One curious glance at an old notebook opened the path to fortune. One discovery proved brilliant ideas don't die. They wait for their moment and for the one who can bring them to life. What did you think of this story? Do you believe such inventions could really be gathering dust in abandoned garages? What would you have done in the hero's place? Share in the comments.